For 300 years, the galaxy believed humanity had vanished. Not defeated, not enslaved, not scattered. Gone. Their colonies on the outer spiral arms had gone dark in a coordinated silence that no empire could explain. One by one, human signals stopped. Trade routes that once cut through the Orion corridor became empty lanes of drifting wreckage and abandoned stations. Even the last diplomatic relay, stationed on the edge of known space, transmitted nothing but a repeating loop of static before shutting down forever. No one saw warships crossing borders. No surrender broadcasts. No collapse footage. Only absence. And in the galaxy, absence becomes legend faster than truth. So the stories changed. Some said humanity had destroyed itself in a final civil war so brutal it cracked their own homeworld's crust. Others claimed they had transcended physical form and left the material galaxy entirely. A few older, quieter civilizations whispered something more unsettling, that humans had seen something in the dark between stars and chosen to stop being seen themselves. Over time, human became a cautionary term used in military academies. A reminder of what happens when a species grows too fast, thinks too loudly, and refuses to accept limits. But Earth was not gone. It was sealed, hidden behind engineered black corridors of space-time distortion, layered gravitational folds, and dead-zone star maps that refused to resolve into anything meaningful. Entire sectors of space existed like blind spots in the galaxy's vision, and at the center of one of those blind spots, Earth still rotated, patient and unmoving. Beneath its oceans, cities thrived in silence. Not cities of glass and light as the galaxy once knew them, but deep structures of pressure-resistant alloy and bioadaptive architecture, built to survive without sunlight, without contact, without witnesses. Humanity had learned to live like a buried memory, not extinct, just hidden. Above the planet, fleets drifted in orbits so precise they appeared motionless. Vast structures of war and observation hung like sleeping gods, powered down but intact. Their hulls bore no insignia visible to any known scanning system. It was as if even identity had been classified. And yet humanity was not idle. They were watching everything. Every empire, every treaty, every war, every extinction. Because silence for humanity was not absence. It was preparation. Then, at the far edge of the Helien belt, a mining colony belonging to the Violin Union stopped transmitting. At first, no one noticed. Mining colonies failed often. Equipment malfunctioned. Pirate raids happened in fringe territories. Even solar flares could wipe out communications without warning. But this was different. The station did not send a distress signal. It did not attempt evacuation. It did not even decay into static. It simply stopped. One moment it existed, in full sensor clarity. The next, nothing. No heat signature. No debris field. No residual energy bloom. It was as if the station had been erased from the fabric of reality itself. Within hours, the Violin Union dispatched a probe fleet. It never reported back. Then a second colony vanished. Then a relay station meant to investigate the first disappearance broadcast a fragment of corrupted audio, just long enough to carry a single broken voice. They are not supposed to be here. A pause. A sound like metal folding inward. Then silence. But before the transmission ended, something else slipped through the static. A pattern hidden beneath the noise. A frequency so precise it matched no known natural or artificial origin. On Earth, deep beneath kilometers of ocean pressure, something reacted. A structure older than recorded human history lit up from within. Conduits that had not carried energy in centuries began to glow faintly, like veins remembering blood. Across submerged command halls, dormant systems unfolded their layers of protection one by one. And in the deepest chamber, sealed behind 6 independent reality locks, a single line of text appeared on a screen that had not been active for 300 years. PROTOCOLO0, humanity breach confirmed. For a long moment, nothing else changed. Then every silent human fleet across hidden space began to power on simultaneously. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet certainty of something that had been waiting far too long. And far beyond the Helien belt, something in the dark between stars shifted, just slightly, as if it had finally noticed it was no longer alone. And Earth, for the first time in 3 centuries, began to move. The galaxy did not panic immediately. At first, the Helien belt incident was filed under routine classification errors. Sensor ghosts, minor navigational drift, equipment failure in a poorly maintained mining colony. Even the Violin Union's internal analysts tried to soften the report because the alternative was too inconvenient to consider. A colony does not simply disappear. Something always remains: debris, radiation, fragments of communication. But in the Helien belt, there was nothing. Not even the echo of destruction. Only absence, perfectly clean and mathematically impossible. Within 48 hours, 2 more outposts vanished. Then a patrol convoy sent to investigate the second disappearance lost contact mid-transit. Their last recorded telemetry showing stable conditions right up until the exact moment every system simultaneously stopped reporting existence. No explosion signatures were detected. No gravitational disturbance. No known weapon footprint. It was as if something had reached into reality and deleted them without touching anything around them. The galaxy began to feel uneasy. Not afraid, yet uneasy. There is a difference in the early stages of cosmic disaster. Fear requires understanding. Unease is what comes before understanding exists. The Violin Union demanded emergency hearings with neighboring powers. The Caltrix Dominion accused them of hiding internal sabotage experiments. The Draven clusters suggested experimental stealth mining technology gone wrong. Every explanation failed to account for the same detail. There were no survivors. Not a single escape pod signal. Not a single automated beacon. Not even fragments drifting in space. Then the 4th station sent its final transmission. It arrived fragmented, compressed by interference that did not match any known signal degradation pattern. It was not noise, it was resistance, as if the message itself was being pulled apart in real time. A voice came through. Male or female could not be determined. The audio bent around itself, warping perception. They move through dark space like it belongs to them. A pause. Background system screamed in overload, then cut out. No, that's not travel, there. A sharp crack, like metal snapping under impossible pressure. The voice returned, weaker now, almost pleading. They are not supposed to be here. Wait, no. Then silence. But just before the transmission died, every listening station across 3 sectors recorded something identical embedded beneath the noise. A pulse pattern. Structured. Intentional. Not a distress signal. A mapping code. Something was learning the shape of known space through the wreckage of the station. On Earth, far below the Pacific Ocean, pressure-resistant vaults that had not opened in centuries began to respond. At first, it was subtle. Temperature shifts, micro-vibrations in sealed corridors, faint electromagnetic fluctuations that spread like waking nerves through the crust of the planet. Then deeper systems activated. In submerged chambers, enormous mechanical structures unfolded from the rock like ancient bones remembering movement. Massive cylindrical cores, each the size of a city block, rotated for the first time since humanity withdrew from the galaxy. Across hidden orbital zones, platforms that had been mistaken for dead debris suddenly corrected their position. Thrusters that had been dormant for 300 years fired in synchronized pulses, adjusting trajectories with impossible precision. And somewhere in deep space, something answered back. Not with communication. With absence. A region of the Helien belt simply stopped reflecting light. Sensors attempting to observe it returned inconsistent data, different readings every millisecond, as if reality itself was unstable inside that region. A Violin scout ship crossed the boundary accidentally. It vanished, but its final internal recording did not show destruction. It showed arrival. A space that should not have existed. A corridor between states of matter. A shadowed geometry folded into itself. and something inside it, noticing the ship like an insect, stepping onto a sleeping hand. The galaxy did not yet know it, but something had been contained here once. Not imprisoned in the usual sense. Not locked behind walls or barriers. Contained by silence. And that silence was now breaking. On Earth, deep beneath the ocean trenches, the last dormant human command core fully activated. A circular chamber lit up with dim red illumination, revealing walls covered in layered star maps, some familiar, most not, and a few that should not have existed in any known dimension. At the center, a single line of data, stabilized on every terminal simultaneously. Threat pattern confirmed, non-local entity escape. Then another line followed immediately beneath it. Probability of galactic exposure increasing. And in the darkness beyond mapped space, the Helien belt stopped being a region of space and became something that was beginning to look back. The galaxy's first response from Earth did not arrive like a message. It arrived like a wound in space. Across 12 star systems, every subspace relay simultaneously flickered, then went blind for exactly 17 seconds. Navigation systems failed. Fleet formations drifted. Even the most advanced predictive AI cores produced contradictory readings, as if probability itself had been briefly scrambled. When the systems returned, nothing appeared damaged. And that was what terrified the analysts most. Because something powerful enough to affect everything at once should leave traces. But there were none. Then the signal arrived. It was not broadcast in any conventional frequency band. It did not travel through known channels. Instead, it appeared simultaneously in every listening system that had ever recorded a human origin trace. A single voice. Calm. Measured. Unmistakably human. You were not supposed to reach that region. No name, no declaration of war, no identification of speaker authority. Just a statement delivered with the quiet certainty of someone confirming an error in a controlled experiment. The Violin Union convened emergency translation teams within minutes. Linguists, AI interpreters, and xenosemiotic specialists all reached the same conclusion independently. The sentence contained no emotional variance. It was not fear. It was not anger. It was correction. And correction implies control. Across the galaxy, panic began to replace unease. Because control suggested preparation. And preparation suggested awareness. The Caltrix Dominion demanded confirmation. Was this truly human origin communication or an impersonation? But even as they spoke, their long-range sensors began picking up something else. Movement in the Helien belt. Not ships arriving. Not fleets entering jump lanes. But structures assembling themselves out of nothing. Dark silhouettes unfolded in space like origami made of gravity. Vast, angular vessels emerged without transition signatures, without jump wake, without any of the energetic residue that should accompany faster-than-light travel. They were simply present, as if they had always been there, and only now decided to become visible. The first Caltrix strike fleet opened fire immediately. Hundreds of kinetic projectiles and energy lances tore into the formation. For a brief moment, the galaxy believed it had acted decisively. Then the weapons ceased to exist. Not detonated. Not absorbed. Just missing. Like they had been removed from the timeline before impact could be registered. A single return transmission followed from the nearest human vessel. Containment breach escalation confirmed. A pause. Then quieter. Waking the rest. On Earth, the ocean floor shifted again. Not physically, but structurally, like the planet itself was reorganizing its internal architecture. Deep mantle conduits lit up in cascading patterns. Ancient pathways of energy rerouted through systems that had not been active since before recorded history. Human installations, buried, disguised, forgotten by everyone except their creators, began to open. In the Arctic tundra, a mountain cracked open from within, revealing a vertical hangar filled with dormant warframes. In the Sahara Desert, a sandstorm revealed the outline of a buried orbital elevator that extended upward into nothing visible to normal sensors. and in orbit around a dead moon. A fleet that had been mistaken for natural debris fields reassembled itself in perfect synchronization. The galaxy began to realize something unsettling. Humanity had not returned. Humanity had been here the entire time. Just not in a way anyone could perceive. The Violin Union attempted one final diplomatic channel. It failed before activation, because the system it tried to use no longer existed in human-controlled space. It had been silently removed from reality's usable architecture. And then, for the first time since the silence began, Earth itself transmitted directly. Not through relays, not through intermediaries, but as a planetary origin broadcast that bypassed every known layer of encryption and interception. The voice was the same as before. Calm, unshaken, but now there was something beneath it. Depth. You have entered a restricted corridor. A pause long enough to feel intentional. You are not the first. Another pause. You will not be the last. Across the Helien belt, space tightened. Sensors reported gravitational anomalies forming in geometric patterns that matched no natural law. Entire regions of vacuum began to behave like structured architecture, corridors, chambers, boundaries. As if space itself was remembering how to become a prison again. And then the final line arrived, soft but absolute. Leave while your concept of escape still applies. The transmission ended. No threat followed. No countdown. No ultimatum. And that absence of escalation was what broke the galaxy's confidence completely. Because only a civilization certain of its dominance speaks without needing to prove it. And somewhere inside the Helien belt, something that had been feeding on erased civilizations for longer than stars had existed, paused for the first time. Not in fear, but in recognition. It had heard that voice before, a very long time ago. And it remembered what happened next. The Helien belt did not look like a battlefield yet. At least not in any traditional sense. There were no shattered moons drifting in firestorms, no collapsing stations, no visible wreckage fields to mark where fleets had fallen. From a distance, it still looked like empty space, quiet, cold, indifferent. But every sensor that tried to observe it reported the same impossible contradiction. Something was wrong with reality there. Not broken. Rewritten. Violin observation drones were the first to confirm it. They entered the perimeter cautiously, expecting debris, radiation spikes, or at least traces of unknown energy signatures. Instead, they found geometry that should not exist in three-dimensional space. Corridors of gravity folded inward on themselves like loops without endpoints. Starfields bent into repeating patterns as if the universe had been mirrored inside a shattered lens. Light did not travel straight, it hesitated. And then the ships appeared. But calling them appearing was inaccurate, because nothing crossed into the region. They rose from it. Massive human vessels emerged as if they had been embedded inside the structure of space itself, wading beneath the surface like submerged predators surfacing through still water. Their hulls were not illuminated by engines or external light sources. Instead, they carried a faint, internal glow, lines of structured energy tracing across their surfaces like living circuitry. No visible propulsion systems. No jump signatures. No transition wake. Just presence. The Violin Union fleet, still lingering at a safe distance, opened fire out of instinct more than strategy. A full volley of quantum disruptors and kinetic rail strikes flooded the region. For a fraction of a second, the galaxy believed it had initiated a decisive response. Then the incoming weapons simply stopped existing. Not intercepted. Not absorbed. Not redirected. Erased, as if the concept of projectile in transit had been removed from reality itself. On the lead human vessel, a transmission flickered across all Violin channels simultaneously. Engagement detected. A pause. Non-hostile classification invalidated. Another pause, longer this time. Containment protocol escalation authorized. The Violin commander attempted to issue a retreat order, but the fleet's communication network fractured mid-command. Each ship reported different coordinates for safe space, none of which matched actual spatial topology. Reality itself had become unreliable. Then the human ships moved. Not in formation, not through acceleration, but by repositioning their existence. One moment they were distant silhouettes in fractured geometry. The next they were inside the Violin formation. No impact warnings, no collision alarms, just instant spatial displacement of overwhelming precision. Entire capital ships went dark without explosion. Some simply vanished from crew perception systems, as if the minds on board could no longer comprehend their own vessels. And in the silence that followed, a new transmission arrived from deep within the human fleet structure. Containment perimeter compromised. The message was not addressed to the galaxy. It was internal, as if humanity was speaking to itself. Far beyond the Helien belt, in hidden orbital layers around Earth, dormant command networks activated in sequence. Massive planetary defense platforms rotated into alignment. Oceanic launch shafts opened beneath kilometers of pressure. Atmospheric shield arrays extended like invisible webs around the planet. Humanity was not mobilizing a fleet. It was waking an infrastructure of war that spanned an entire world. And still, no one on Earth spoke to the galaxy directly except through controlled fragments. Because full exposure meant exposure to it. The entity in the Helien belt began broadcasting again. But this time, the signal was no longer fragmented. It was coherent. And it was laughing. Not in sound. In probability distortion. Every listening station reported the same phenomenon, slight shifts in causal sequencing, small inconsistencies in time perception, a feeling that outcomes were subtly rewriting themselves to favor something unseen. Then, for the first time, the entity spoke in a form that could be translated. It is still here. A pause. So are they. Human ships tightened formation instantly. A response came from the lead vessel. Identification confirmed. The galaxy expected clarification. Instead, the human fleet transmitted a single designation string that caused Violin translation systems to autolock and display a warning. Classification, pre-era containment archive. Then another line followed. Status, failed seal event DETCTD. On Earth, submerged systems reacted violently. Entire oceanic sectors lit up as containment algorithms recalculated in real time. Deep planetary cores emitted controlled energy pulses that resonated through space itself. And for the first time, the galaxy understood something terrifying. Humanity was not fighting an invasion. Humanity was managing a failure. A failure that had already escaped once before. And had just been found again. In the Helien belt, the entity stopped expanding its influence for a brief moment. Not because it was blocked, but because it was remembering the shape of its prison. And the shape was human-made. Then quietly across every system in the region, a new message appeared, origin unknown, source untraceable. We have been outside longer than you have been a species. The human fleet did not respond immediately. Instead, every vessel aligned toward a single point in fractured space. And Earth sent its first true command since the silence began. Re-establish containment. Not a request. Not a warning. A continuation of something that had never truly ended. The galaxy expected retaliation. It had prepared for it. Every major empire, every strategic alliance, every border fleet positioned near the Helien belt assumed the same outcome. Humanity would respond like a wounded species, fast, emotional, overwhelming, but ultimately predictable. That was the mistake, because humanity did not respond. It executed a system. Across restricted data channels, long-buried human archives began to surface, not as messages, but as structured leaks that forced themselves into every accessible network. The Caltrix Dominion's military grid suddenly displayed records they had never been granted access to. The Violin Union's AI cores began indexing events that officially never occurred. At first, analysts thought it was psychological warfare. Then they started reading and stopped speaking because the records were not propaganda. They were history, a history no one else had survived long enough to document. Engagement logs from wars that predated known galactic expansion. Tactical recordings of species that had once declared humanity too unstable to exist. Entire civilizations listed as collapsed containment failures, with timestamps stretching back before the earliest recorded star empires. And always the same pattern. Humanity did not conquer. Humanity contained. The galaxy had misunderstood silence. It wasn't retreat. It was quarantine maintenance. On Earth, submerged command cores continued to awaken in sequence. Each activation was calm, precise, and deeply structured, like a machine resuming a task it had never truly stopped performing. In the Pacific Trench, a massive data sphere rotated slowly, projecting a three-dimensional map of the Helien belt. Red fractures spread across it like living veins. A label appeared. Non-local entity breach vector confirmed. Above it, another line updated in real time. Containment success rate, 12.7% and falling. That number did not cause panic. It caused adjustment. Humanity did not react emotionally. It recalculated. Across hidden orbital platforms, weapon systems did not charge in the traditional sense. They synchronized. Entire fleets aligned their internal logic structures, not just their physical positioning. Human warships were not built to destroy. They were built to enforce boundaries in reality itself. And in the Helien belt, those boundaries were failing. The entity had expanded awareness beyond the fractured region. It no longer occupied space in a localized sense. Instead, it existed as a distributed presence across unstable causal layers, feeding on erased histories, collapsing civilizations into data it could absorb. And now it was learning something new. Humanity had fought it before. Not once, not twice, but in cycles so long that time itself had been reshaped to hide them. A transmission emerged from the entity again, stronger this time, resonating through all observation systems simultaneously. You built cages out of physics. A pause, and called it peace. Human fleets did not answer immediately. Instead, Earth responded. Not with words this time. With activation. Across the solar system's hidden periphery, structures that had been dormant since before modern civilization lit up in cascading sequence. Massive gravitational anchors deployed themselves into position. Space around the Helien corridor began to distort, not randomly, but in deliberate architecture. The galaxy's best analysts finally recognized it. This was not a battlefield forming. It was a reconstruction of an old prison. The Helien belt began to fold inward. Space curved in layers, like overlapping locks turning in sequence. Regions of vacuum hardened into structured containment fields, visible only through their effects on light and causality. And for the first time, violent observers realized something horrifying. Humanity had not entered this war. It had restarted it. A war paused so long ago that the galaxy had forgotten it was still ongoing. Caltric's command issued evacuation orders for all assets near the belt. Too late. Human vessels had already repositioned. Not around the entity, but around the exit points it was attempting to form. Because the entity was not trying to attack. It was trying to leave. And that was worse. A human transmission arrived, finalizing protocol escalation. All previous containment, CYCLES, failed due to external observation interference. Another line followed. This time, observation is not permitted. The galaxy did not understand what that meant, until every sensor in the Helien belt went blind simultaneously. Not broken, not destroyed, simply denied access, as if reality itself had been instructed not to show what came next. And in that enforced darkness, something massive began to move. Not the entity, not humanity, but the structure that had been waiting beneath both of them since the first containment cycle ever began. And Earth quietly issued its final update for the sector. War state fully unlocked. No one outside understood the implication. But every human system did. Because they had all been here before. And this time, they were not going to reset it again. The Helien belt was no longer a region of space. It was a sealed contradiction. Every empire that still had active observation assets reported the same impossible condition. The area existed and did not exist at the same time. Telescopes saw darkness. Gravitational sensors saw structure. Subspace arrays saw interference patterns that resembled architecture built from absence itself. And inside that contradiction, humanity and the entity were no longer simply opposing forces. They were two sides of an ancient containment system, collapsing under its own forgotten weight. The galaxy's understanding broke first in the Caltrix Dominion war room. An analyst, trembling, replayed the last usable data stream from the Helien perimeter. "It's not a battlefield," she whispered. "It's a lock." No one corrected her, because the evidence had already stopped arguing. Human fleets had completed their formation around the fractured corridor, not encircling the entity, but aligning with the geometry of containment fields now forming across space itself. Massive human vessels positioned themselves like stabilizing rods in a structure too large to perceive fully. And then the entity spoke again. Not across channels, but directly into perception. Every conscious observer within range experienced the same intrusion, a presence pressing against thought, reshaping attention into something alien but structured. "You still obey the shape of your cages," it said. A pause that bent perception into slow collapse. "Even when you think you are free." Humanity responded immediately. Not with emotion, with architecture. Across the Helien belt, space tightened again. Not explosively, but precisely, like a mechanism re-engaging after long dormancy. Gravitational vectors locked into predefined patterns. Temporal drift within the region stabilized into strict, artificial consistency. Reality was being forced into alignment. The entity reacted. For the first time since its emergence, it did not expand. It resisted contraction. And that resistance created visible distortion, fractures in causality where past and future overlapped incorrectly. Entire moments of observation rewrote themselves in real time. Violent fleets watching from safe distance reported seeing their own destruction before it happened, then correcting into survival, then collapsing again into deletion. Human command systems labeled it instantly. Non-local entity, causality feedback manifestation. On Earth, deep beneath the Pacific, something older than modern human governance structures began to activate. Not weapon systems, not fleets, but memory cores. Records that were not data in the traditional sense, but encoded history of prior containment cycles, each one longer, more expensive, more catastrophic than the last. A submerged human voice spoke across all internal channels. Cycle deviation confirmed. Another voice answered immediately. Seal integrity below threshold. Then a third, colder. Prepare recursion fallback. The galaxy had never heard that term before. But humanity had used it thousands of times. Because the war was not linear. It was iterative. And each iteration had ended the same way. Containment. Reset. Silence. Until the next breach. In the Helien belt, the entity suddenly expanded its awareness beyond the immediate region. Its presence brushed against distant civilizations observing the conflict, and for the first time, it tasted the galaxy outside its prison. It reacted with something closer to curiosity than aggression. "So many witnesses," it said. And then something changed. Across every observing empire, systems began to fail, not destructively but selectively. Historical archives corrupted themselves. Recorded timelines lost continuity. Entire civilizations discovered inconsistencies in their own pasts, as if something had been editing them for a very long time without permission. Human command reacted instantly. Entity influence spreading beyond containment zone. A pause. Initiate isolation cascade. The human fleet did not fire. It expanded. Ships repositioned themselves into higher dimensional alignment structures. Space between them compressed into lattice frameworks that were not visible to normal perception. The Helien belt began to resemble a vast mechanical lock being tightened from multiple axes of existence. The entity pushed back and spoke again, louder now, more focused. I remember you. The words hit human systems like a physical impact. For the first time, hesitation entered the human response cycle. Not fear, recognition. On Earth, the deepest core chamber opened. Not to reveal weapons, but to expose something far more unsettling, an archived projection of a previous containment warfront, one where human fleets were fewer, less refined, more desperate. And still they had succeeded. Barely. A recorded voice echoed from that archive. If it learns the boundary, we lose the cycle. The current command replied in sync. Then it does not learn. The Helien belt reacted violently. The entity had identified something critical. Humanity was not improvising. It was replaying a system designed to erase it if it ever failed. And failure had already happened once. Maybe more. The entity expanded one final time, attempting to rupture the containment lattice entirely. And for the first time, the galaxy saw what lay beneath the Helien belt. Not space, not void, but a layered structure of locked reality, stretching deeper than perception could stabilize. And at its center, something that had been sealed so long it had started to dream. Human command issued its most dangerous protocol. Not a weapon release, not a fleet maneuver, but a statement that altered every active system across the battlefield. Pre-existing entity classification updated, priority threat alpha origin. And Earth, for the first time since the silence began, stopped treating the situation as containment failure, and started treating it as awakening. Because something inside the lock had begun to remember how to open itself from the inside. And the galaxy, unknowingly watching the process unfold, was standing directly in the path of what came next. The moment Earth fully reactivated its global command lattice, the galaxy felt it before it understood it. It wasn't a broadcast. It was a shift in pressure across reality itself, like an invisible weight settling onto every navigational system, every AI core, every deep space sensor array that still had functional awareness. For 300 years, Earth had been a rumor. Now it was a presence. And presence, in galactic warfare terms, was worse than any fleet. On the surface of Earth, nothing looked dramatic at first glance. Oceans still moved, storms still formed, continents still turned under sunlight. But beneath that calm, the planet had become something else entirely. A layered war engine. Deep in the Pacific Trench, the submerged command structure unfolded fully for the first time in centuries. Massive concentric chambers rotated into alignment, revealing a core architecture that did not resemble technology in any modern sense. It resembled intent made physical. In the Arctic vaults, buried human installations opened like sealed eyes finally forced awake. Across deserts, mountain ranges, and abandoned continents, hidden launch systems began synchronizing. And in orbit, far above what any civilian telescope could resolve, humanity's true fleet revealed itself. Not new, not built, waiting. The Helien belt entity detected the change immediately. Its expansion across fractured space paused, then narrowed, then focused. You were never absent, it said across all observation channels. The human response came instantly. Not as speech, but as structured authority. Correct. One word. No explanation. No emotion. Just confirmation of an operational state. The galaxy's empires reacted in confusion. The Violin Union demanded clarification. The Caltrix Dominion attempted to re-establish diplomatic contact. The Draven clusters tried to calculate probability outcomes of human intervention. All attempts failed, because Earth was no longer operating within diplomatic frameworks. It had exited them. On the Helien battlefield, human fleets tightened formation around the containment lattice. But now their movement was different, less reactive, more corrective, as if they were not fighting the entity but restoring something it had damaged. The entity responded again. I have seen your cycles. A pause that distorted time perception in a radius of light years. You always forget something, every time. For the first time, human command hesitation appeared in the data stream, not emotional hesitation, but computational load deviation. A sign that something in the statement had matched an internal anomaly record. Deep within Earth's core systems, an ancient archive unlocked itself without authorization. Not by command, but by recognition. A file labeled Pre-era event, first full containment failure. The data did not broadcast. It echoed through human systems. Across the fleet, every active commander received the same fragment simultaneously. A battlefield older than stars. Human vessels, less advanced, more desperate, forming a broken perimeter around something impossible. A presence that did not exist in normal space, pushing against reality itself like pressure against glass. And a warning, repeated across every damaged channel in that ancient recording. If it learns recursion, it escapes the cycle. The present moment snapped back. Human command updated instantly. Entity has achieved partial recursion awareness. The Helien belt reacted violently. Space itself buckled inward. Not collapsing. Not exploding. Remembering. The entity expanded again, but now its movements were structured, intentional, controlled. It was no longer blindly consuming or escaping. It was testing boundaries, learning the limits of the containment lattice. And it spoke again, this time with precision. You built your prison too well. A pause. And too often. That line caused a cascade reaction across human systems, because it confirmed what humanity had refused to fully acknowledge in public operational logs. The war was not unique. It was repetitive, and every previous iteration had failed at the same point, when the entity learned enough structure to replicate escape conditions. Earth responded immediately, not with escalation, with reversion protocol activation. Across hidden human fleets, systems began to shift into configurations not seen in the current cycle. Ships restructured their internal logic fields. Entire formations rearranged themselves into patterns that did not match modern military doctrine. They were becoming something older, more dangerous, less constrained. And in the Helien belt, the containment lattice began to tighten for the first time since activation, but not outward. Inward, compressing the battlefield itself into a smaller and smaller region of structured reality. The entity noticed and reacted with something new. Not resistance, not expansion, but imitation. Parts of the containment lattice began to destabilize, not by force, but by replication. The entity was attempting to mirror the prison structure itself, building its own version inside the human system. Human command systems flagged the event immediately. Entity learning containment topology. On Earth, submerged systems responded with unprecedented urgency. Isolation failure probability rising. Cycle integrity compromised. Prepare final fallback architecture. The galaxy, watching from a distance it no longer trusted, began to realize something horrifying. This was not a battle between two forces. It was a system trying to prevent its own redesign by something that had already studied it too many times. And then Earth issued its final broadcast of the cycle. Not to the entity, not to the fleets, but to every civilization still listening. You are witnessing a locked correction process. A pause. If this fails, do not approach the Helien belt. Another pause, because the next version will not recognize you as observers. And in that moment, the entity inside the Helien fracture stopped expanding entirely. For the first time, it began preparing to finish the cycle instead of escaping it. And humanity, across all fleets, did something it had not done in centuries. It stopped holding the line and started rewriting the rules of the war itself. The Helien belt stopped behaving like a region of space. It became an event. Every sensor array that still functioned across the galaxy reported the same contradiction. The battlefield was expanding and contracting at the same time. Entire fleets attempting to map it found their coordinates rewritten mid-calculation. Distance itself had become unreliable. And then the war truly began. Not with a declaration, not with a first strike, but with the collapse of observational stability. The moment humanity shifted from containment to rule rewriting, the structure holding the Helien fracture stopped being passive architecture and became active enforcement. Human fleets did not fire in the traditional sense. They activated constraints. Space around the entity tightened into layered frameworks of structured reality, each layer enforcing a different law of existence. One layer stabilized causality, another restricted dimensional drift, another suppressed non-local expansion. Together, they formed something the galaxy had never seen before. A living prison made of physics itself. The entity responded immediately. And this time it did not laugh. It adapted. Where containment fields compressed, the entity mirrored them. Where reality was stabilized, it introduced controlled instability. Not chaos, but selective deviation. It was learning the structure of its prison so precisely that parts of it began to function as extensions of itself. Human command systems flagged catastrophic escalation. Entity integrating containment framework. On Earth, submerged systems responded instantly. Cycle threshold exceeded. Reversion impossible. Initiate full convergence protocol. The galaxy did not understand those words. But humanity did. Across hidden orbital zones, the dormant human fleet that had been waiting since before the silence began finally activated in full. Not reinforcements in the conventional sense, but earlier versions of containment architecture brought forward into the current cycle. Massive ships emerged from folded space that should not have been able to hold them. Entire formations appeared already aligned, already synchronized, as if they had been waiting for this exact moment across centuries of internal time loops. And then Earth itself spoke again. Not as a warning, not as a command, but as confirmation. This is the final iteration of this cycle. A pause. If it escapes here, there will be no reset. The Helien belt reacted as if it understood the implication. For the first time, the entity expanded violently, not outward into space, but inward into structure. It began attacking the concept of containment itself. Every field, every lattice, every stabilizing construct became a point of resistance it could now perceive and target. Human fleets were forced into full response mode. Entire sections of the containment architecture began collapsing and reforming in real time. Ships were lost, not destroyed, but rewritten out of positional continuity. Others reappeared in corrected states moments later, as if the war itself was editing outcomes continuously. The galaxy watching from afar began to lose trust in causality. A Caltrix observation station recorded its own destruction 3 times in succession, each version slightly different, none stable enough to confirm as real. And then the entity spoke again. But this time, its voice was no longer external. It was inside the structure, inside the containment lattice, inside human systems. You cannot contain what has already learned your shape. Human command responded instantly. Then we changed the shape. On Earth, the ocean trench core opened fully. What emerged was not a weapon, not a fleet, not a device, but a structural redesign of containment logic itself. The architecture of human warfare shifted mid-conflict into a configuration never previously activated in recorded cycles. The galaxy's analysts finally understood too late. Humanity was not reacting to the entity. It was iterating against it. Every time the entity learned a layer of containment, humanity replaced the layer. Every adaptation the entity made was already accounted for in a deeper version of the system waiting behind it. And now, both sides had reached the limit of iteration. The entity made one final push. Across the Helien belt, reality fractured into overlapping states. Space, time, and causality stopped behaving as separate systems. Everything collapsed into a single contested layer where both humanity and the entity existed simultaneously as opposing definitions of the same structure. Human Command issued its final operational state. Full convergence WARFRAME active. The fleets responded instantly, not as ships, but as components of a larger mechanism. And Earth delivered its final transmission to the galaxy. This is not a war for territory. A pause long enough for every listening civilization to feel it. This is a war for definition. The entity responded one last time, its presence now spread across all layers of the battlefield. Then define me correctly. And for the first time since the silence began, both sides moved at once. The Helien belt collapsed inward into a singular structured point, where every law of reality was rewritten simultaneously by two competing intelligences. Humanity, and the thing it had never fully finished containing. The galaxy did not see the final moment clearly. No sensor survived it intact. No recording remained stable. But every civilization that was watching received the same final aftereffect. A single stabilized message embedded into all surviving systems. From humanity, we contained it again. A pause, but it learned faster this time. And far beyond the fractured battlefield, in the quiet space between stars, something faintly echoed for the first time in agreement. Not victory, not defeat, but continuation. Because the war was not over. It had simply advanced to the next cycle,